Belonging. What does that word bring up? What does it feel like to belong? Personally, the feeling of belonging, or lack thereof, lies deep at the heart of my own story. But this crisis of belonging is also mirrored in the cultural, political, technological, and spiritual challenges of our time. It's the old story of separation, of alienation, of never quite fitting in. The endless search for the right relationship or community or career. The hope that if I could just achieve that one thing, start that family, find my tribe, be seen by others as something better, more desirable, more deserving. Then, finally then, I will feel like I belong. Belonging has always felt slippery, like a moving goal. Like just when I think I've found it, it withers, or is snatched away. Or I realize, well, wait a minute, I don't really fit in here after all. And then it's gone. And while my mind knows that this is all ultimately an inside job, and that the only thing I really need to find is more self-love and acceptance, these patterns keep reappearing, just in newer, more subtle disguises. And despite all the meditation and the healing and the shadow work, and all the heart-opening medicines wrapped like sweets inside layers of suffering, and all the time spent just sitting alone amongst the trees in quiet communion, after all of it, that felt sense of belonging still remains, stubbornly fleeting. I grew up in a culture of self-reliance, in the story of I'm better off just doing it myself. Don't ask for help. Avoid codependency. The story where success and self-worth is derived from being more prepared than the other guy, working harder, smarter, faster than the other guy. And wait a minute, now I don't even need the other guy because anything I really need I can just buy. There's of course an app for that too. A whole metaverse, in fact, in which to find, cultivate, and with enough gamified, advertised, tracked, and controlled engagement, finally achieve that elusive belonging. But take away the technology, and what does belonging feel like? Beyond concept and abstraction, what does it feel like in the body? And how do you go about feeling that feeling more often? How do you make it more of a verb to be practiced rather than a noun to be found? How do you begin to touch that awareness that wherever you are, whomever you are right where you need to be? Because you belong here. You've always belonged. Show me that, and I'll show you a more beautiful world. Which brings me to Charles Eisenstein, who has, across his several books and many essays, articulated some of the clearest, most compelling observations of the interconnected crises we're all facing in this age of transition between world stories. He's greatly influenced my thinking in many ways, so I can't think of a better person to speak with about this subject. This conversation was originally just going to be used as the basis for a short film I made called To Be at Home in the World, which you can find a link to in the description. But I also wanted to share the entire audio here because there's a lot more context and insight than what was edited down for the film. We talk about the crisis of belonging, the price of progress, a new definition of miracles, the process of installing new belief systems, prophetic speech, and more. So I invite you to listen with full awareness and an open heart. And I hope this conversation helps you to remember to be at home in the world.
I had that passage you wrote. Do you want to just read that and see if it kind of I think it's a
just
good,
for the
yeah.
voice. I think it's a
Yeah.
good passage just to read.
All right. Great. The root crisis of our time is a crisis of belonging. It comes from the atrophy of our ecological and community relationships. Who am I? Each relationship tells me who I am. When someone knows not the stories behind the faces he or she sees every day, or the names and uses of the plants, or the history of a place and its people, when the outdoors is just so much scenery, populated mostly by strangers, when one has no intimate companions outside the nuclear family, when one does not know well and is not well known, then one can barely exist, for existence is relationship. The insecure, isolated individual that remains is always anxious, susceptible to manipulation, and an easy target for marketers selling tokens of identity. He or she will eagerly take up whatever politically generated identities are available, aligning with an us against a them to gain a fragile sense of belonging. And the comfort of the digital world will easily seduce that person into replacing lost material relationships with digital ones.
Yeah, so I mean, I think taking that as kind of a jumping off point, I bring the story of separation back into my life personally. It's always been this search for belonging, and this feeling of alienation, this feeling of trying to find something that just continually eludes me. Um, and I think I mean, I can know in my head that it's self-love and acceptance. It's starting with the belonging here and then finding it outside myself. And yet, as much as I've worked for that, as much as I've, you know, found ways to feel that inside myself, it still feels like the exterior world is manifesting something different. So
Uh-huh.
I wonder if what your relationship to belonging has been like. What does that word bring up for you when you hear it?
When people have a feeling of alienation and not being at home, not belonging, the pattern is to diagnose it as something wrong about you, something wrong about yourself. And as you said, make it that it's an inside job. But our alienation, our feeling of being outcast, of not being at home, it's not like you did something wrong and ended up that way. In fact, that ideology is part of the alienating program. It alienates you from yourself. I've been noticing, I've raised 4 children. When back in the day, my older kids, they're in their 20s now, but they were really interested in Pokemon when they were little. And they knew the names and images and attributes of hundreds of Pokemon. Today, my 9-year-old son, he's gotten interested in D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. And he knows, again, like the names and attributes of hundreds of monsters. And I realized, I've had this realization all along, if we lived in a place-based society where children were interacting with nature all the time, then all of that brain power would be devoted to knowing the plants and animals around them. And that knowledge wouldn't be like some isolated realm that adults know nothing about and that has no relevance to adult life and no relevance to practical life. It would be integrated into all of it. So if you grew up like that in a world of images and products, then you're going to feel alienated. It doesn't mean you can't recover a sense of belonging in the world. But the first step is to realize that we have been cast in many ways, economically, through our social, physical infrastructure, through our ideologies, through our mythology. We have been cast into a very desolate, disconnected place. And really the there's no shortcut. Like there's no, 15-minute a day meditation practice or something like that that is going to repair all of these sundered relationships, even if you have a strong intention to do so and you recognize the importance of that. Where do you start? You have to start somewhere. Maybe you start in a garden, or maybe you start by reaching out to neighbors. And maybe the neighbors aren't interested because they're meeting all of their needs through money. So what do you do? I'm not saying it's impossible, but in fact, I'm saying kind of the opposite. There's a million pathways, but none of them catapult you immediately into the embeddedness of, say, a traditional village or somewhere. They're all a embarkation on a voyage, and or you could say a first step or a second step or a third step on a very, very long path to reunion. And there's also a cosmological dimension to this, like a mystical cosmological dimension of a return to God. We have become far more alienated from God than people were a few centuries ago. And it's not because of a decline in religiosity. It's because of a intoxication with the religion of our time, which is a religion of separation, which narrates to ourselves who we are and what the world is, telling us that we are separate selves that are fundamentally distinct from the world. You are a separate self having experiences and having relationships. Whereas to know oneself as at home, you can't just be a separate self having relationships. You have to understand that relationship is who you are. And that you're not an observer of the world, you are a participant in the world. And not only a participant through the force you exert on the rest of matter, but that you are existentially a participant in the world. That you are, that without you, the world is less. And without any other being in the world, you are less. It's not just interdependency or interconnection, that's part of it, but it's also interexistence, interbeing. So this return, this great return, is always available to us, not as an instantaneous transport, but as a path to walk. And that path could take on a spiritual dimension, so-called spiritual, which really what I'm talking about is the reconnection to lost parts of ourselves that are available through meditation, through plant medicine, through practices like that, introspection. And then also the recovery of the connections outside of ourselves, outside of what we think of as ourselves, which is just the step-by-step rebuilding of relationships. Very mundane relationships to actual plants, animals, people, to the world.
There's something about the culture that teaches self-reliance, like that's so baked in, at least for myself, but I think it's part of the American ethos as well, which is, it's better, I can just do it myself. I don't need help. I want to avoid codependency. I don't want to be beholden to anyone. As long as that exists, it sort of is impossible to build community. People out there trying to build community, and yet we're still in this sort of system of...
Right. So if everybody's pursuing a goal of independence and self-reliance, then there is no basis for community, because community is built from debt, from not financial debt legally enforced, but from the debt that we call gratitude. Everybody has given things to everybody else. And so you're woven together in a network of giving and receiving, in a network of obligation, in a network of gratitude. If everybody is self-reliant, if everybody's meeting their needs through money, then you literally don't need anybody. So how can you have community if in the background is the realization, I don't need you and you don't need me? So you could say that this ideal of independence and self-reliance is an obstacle to community, but it's not actually the deepest cause. Like, why have we taken on this ideology of independence and self-reliance? Well, it's natural if you are in a environment where everybody is out for themselves, where everybody's trying to rip you off, where gifts are not circulating freely, where everything comes with a price. If that's the matrix that you are in, then you better become self-reliant and you better not depend on other people, because they're going to try to take advantage of you. And it's not that they're evil or that they were born evil. That is the behavior of economic actors in a market-based economy. We do it all the time. You go online, you're going to buy a product. Do you pick the cheaper one if it's identical, or the more expensive one? You're probably going to pick the cheaper one. Why not? You don't know this person. It's one Amazon seller over another. So you're not going to think, well, gosh, if I pick the cheaper one, then somebody won't be able to make a decent profit and feed their kids, because you don't know them. They're not in your community. So this behavior, Steiner called it a war of each against all, is kind of built into our economic system, into our social environment. So the impulse to be self-reliant, it's not a pathology in that sense. It's a response. And we can notice how it has become habitual and how we might apply it in situations where, you don't need to be on guard. And you don't need to make sure you're not obligated and make sure you don't owe anybody something. Like there's definitely situations where it's okay to enter into gift, enter into trust. So that there is like a personal development dimension of this recovery, which is to undo habits of separation, habits of scarcity. But the habits came from a valid place. We're intelligent, We develop these habits to get by in a hostile economic system that's always trying to exploit you. Not even because of exploitative-minded people, but that's just the roles that are available. That's where the rewards are. And there are so many mechanisms to distance ourselves that distance us from each other and distance us from the impact of our self-interest maximizing choices on other people and on the environment. So the work is not only internal, it's also about creating systems that bring out the best in us, that make it easy to share, that make it natural to share, that embody abundance. Because if you are in a situation of abundance, sharing and generosity come naturally because I'll be okay. If, for example, if you're in a society where everybody is sharing all the time and nobody accumulates more than they need, because at any time, if they have more than they need, they give it to somebody who is in need. If you're in that situation, why would you ever hoard? It's useless because your needs are going to be met. So that's
Do you want to talk a little about control being the substitute for belonging?
Sure.
And how that kind of relates to all this?
So when you have a sense of belonging and you feel at home in the world, then that's a kind of a security. It's on a very practical level. It's the security of being in community that will take care of you if something bad happens to you. We don't have that security in the society. You might have, some dear relatives or dear friends who will help you out if you're going through hard times. But generally speaking, like if you're say your retirement fund gets wiped out, or your bank account gets wiped out, or there's hyperinflation and you have nothing anymore, then you're going to have trouble meeting your basic needs. You might lose your home. No matter how good your friends and relatives are, it's not common these days that they're just going to give you all the money that you need. Like, there's not that level of trust. So we have a basic insecurity in the modern environment. We can, to some extent, compensate for that insecurity by having a lot of money, by having a lot of power, by controlling our environment. And so that's one level of where the obsession with control and security comes from. It comes from a basic insecurity. But there's also a whole other level of it that goes deeper, which is the way that we are trained to see the world. When we see ourselves as the only intelligent agents in a universe of force and mass, of impersonal, arbitrary, random forces that have no purpose or intelligence in and of themselves, then we are forever at the mercy of these forces unless we can transcend them, unless we can harness them and turn them to our purposes and impose intelligence onto a world that has none, bring order to chaos. So this insecurity also motivates the entire progress of technology and the equation of progress with control. And then I would even maybe go to a deeper alienation, which is the teaching that the universe consists of fundamentally atoms and void, that life, love, intelligence, consciousness are, in the end, just the interactions of mechanical forces. They are illusions. So our experience of love and consciousness is also an illusion in this mythology. And that, because that is the essence of our humanness, consciousness, and love, our ideology alienates us from the universe. It says humanity, what makes you you, has no actual existence. It's just an illusion. The grappling with this, if you take that for granted, it leads inevitably into nihilism. So these are these different levels of our alienation and the insecurity that comes from it, and the obsession with control, the obsession with preserving the separate self that is narrated to us, the obsession with avoiding death, with maintaining youth. All of these things come from the mythology that tells us who we are and what the universe is.
Yeah, I think I can, like when I listen to this and I hear this and I imagine someone else hearing this, I feel that, yeah, it sounds great, and yet it requires a letting go. It requires a being broken to some extent to really need, letting go of that self-reliance, that need to control usually doesn't come willingly for most people, some maybe, and I see that mirrored maybe in the society, that crisis is ultimately really, really bad. Not just something, I can move past this hard part in my life. It's really broken down to nothing and rebuilt. And it feels like, do you feel like that's the way that the news story has to be, that we both at an individual level, and then that's also being mirrored in the collective?
Yeah. Crisis by itself won't save us. Collapse will not automatically propel us won't automatically propel us back onto the path of reunion. But it does offer a choice, an initiatory moment that we can receive and accept and say yes to, or we can push away. It's just like when an addict is in that downward spiral. We talk about hitting bottom, but it's not actually just one bottom. It's a series of bottoms. And each bottom says, okay, are you done with this yet? Are you ready to, and if you look at the 12 steps, it's all about letting go of control. It's all about surrender to a higher power, to realize that you're not, you have no power over your addiction. Very interesting how those 12 steps are written. They're written kind of in the past tense. They're not actually a program for here's how to do it. They're descriptive. Yet the description can be catalytic. Anyway, the hitting bottom. So an addict, say an alcoholic, could wake up one morning and his wife has left him. And he's lying in a puddle of vomit. And that's for him, that's the worst thing in the world. He's hit bottom. Someone else might continue drinking after that and end up in prison. Someone else might be literally on his deathbed and still be trying to sneak alcohol into the hospital room. So collectively now, we're also being offered deepening loss and being asked, have you had enough yet? Are you ready, humanity, to embark on the return journey? I've noticed the fireflies are gone this year. They've been kind of diminishing throughout my lifetime. When I was a kid, I remember it was just galaxies of fireflies. It was just breathtaking. And out at my brother's farm, there's still, at least a couple years ago, there were still good numbers of them. It was still pretty awesome. And there's always been fireflies here in Rhode Island, but I'm not, it's already mid-July. I haven't seen them yet. I've seen like one or two. And part of me, this feels alienating to me. Why isn't everybody in an uproar about it? Why isn't anybody grieving this? Why is this tolerable to have no fireflies? We have not hit bottom yet. We're still trying to make it work. We're still indulging the addiction to control. The loss of the fireflies is probably caused by our efforts to control things. Where my brother lives, they spray the entire mountainside with insecticide. I think it's to combat West Nile virus. West Nile, yeah. I'll say it again because a train just went by. I think it's to combat West Nile virus, which has killed 3 people nationally. Is that, why? Why are we spraying entire seemingly pristine forests? Well, 3 people died. We have to do something. What do? We find something to blame and something to control. And it's the mosquitoes. It's West Nile virus. And they sprayed the state for Zika virus, which I don't even know if it killed anybody. But that's the solution template, is you find something to blame and you impose control on that thing. So the result, and I don't know, I can't prove that repeatedly dousing the landscape in insecticide for the last 40 years. It started when I was a kid. They were spraying for gypsy moths. I can't prove that is causing the decline of the fireflies. I don't know. But to me, the fact that we just kind of accept it is itself really alienating and painful.
Yeah, when I feel into this, it feels just so overwhelming and daunting, and it feels like the only change is coming either from, like you said, complete collapse or a miracle. I
Yeah.
like how you speak about miracles, so maybe there's something there too.
Yeah. So when we become aware of the magnitude of the forces arrayed against change, the powers that rule this world, and the depths of our own habits, and just the inertia of society, and the loss, the magnitude of the losses to nature, to culture, to community, it can seem totally hopeless, and we can succumb to despair. And in fact, despair is actually an important part of the process, because that is how we let go of the wrong way to do it. We let go of the tools that we are familiar with. In fact, if I am limited to my realism, it is impossible that the world will ever heal. But my realism is an inheritance from a world story that is much narrower than what is really real and possible. And it is, in fact, the precise world story that has created the crisis to begin with. When we open up to a larger causality, to a bigger reality than what modernity says is real, then the situation is no longer hopeless, because we have access to all kinds of miracles. Miracles being something that are not possible from the story that you live in, but that are possible from a bigger story, and that insert themselves into the course of events as a signal that you're living in too small a world. Usually miracles appear in your life when you have let go of something. For example, you have a medically incurable condition, you've seen all the specialists, they tell you that there's nothing they can do, or that you're imagining things, you finally give up, and that's when the holistic practitioner shows up in your life and heals you. Because there's no way you were even going to look for that holistic practitioner until, in some sense, you had given up, if this is where you're coming from. And I know a lot of people now are born into the holistic models, but you know, a very common trajectory is that you totally trusted the system and it failed you. And that provided a choice point. It's kind of like hitting bottom again. It provides a choice point, and you can let go of hope, and you might go through a time of despair. But that is the gateway. That despair is also a descent into unknowing. And that in that vacuum of unknowing, new knowledge can arise. And then we discover capacities and causal principles that we had been unaware of before. And we experience synchronicity. And we experience, like, there are so many miracle technologies, miracle, again, being impossible from the old story, that are out there on the fringes. And if we accepted them and received them and cohered around them, we could solve all the world's problems easily in 5 years. We could restore the planet to more life than it has ever had. But we keep these out of reality. So, yeah, so the despair is part of the process, but there's something that a lifeline that we can hold on to through the despair, which comes from beyond our realism and beyond our reason, or it draws from a different kind of logic. It's a heart logic that I can invoke right now. For example, if it were hopeless, you would not be here. The very fact that you are here with your aspirations and your yearnings for a more beautiful world, that means that it's possible and that you have a role to play in it. I can't explain why that is true, but there's a certain logic to it. And that logic draws on a knowledge that there is intelligence in all things. That the world is not just an accident. This cognizance of an intelligence in all things can never be taken away from you. You could be in denial of it. It can seem inaccessible, but it's always there. It's built into who we are. So when you're going through that despair, maybe somebody will come or some incident will happen, something will happen that awakens that basic knowledge and reminds you of the intelligence. I mean, you can call it God, the intelligence in all things.
It's like everything you talk about requires an installation of a new belief system, right? And when I think about how I install a new belief system and then suddenly a miracle technology becomes available, it often comes through collapse. It often comes through complete loss and hitting rock bottom. But there's something else. It still needs a belief. It still needs an act of the will to do that. And I wonder if that...
Is that true, though? Is it true that it needs an act of will to install a new belief system? Or could it be that a new belief system is already growing in you? And really what it requires is an act of gratitude. Simply to notice, wow, actually my belief is changing. And I am more available to miracle and to possibilities that I had not been imagining before. And maybe the pace is not as fast as I would like, but wow, I've really changed in the last 5 years. Thank you. And that thank you, that gratitude for a process that is being given to you accelerates the process and maybe even invokes the process. Maybe even it's paradoxical. Like what you have to do to install a new belief system is to be grateful that a new belief system is being installed. The modern mind has trouble understanding this paradox, but another part of you besides the mind does understand it. And and that's part of the new habit of trust. This is what I talk about. This is like what being at home in the world is. It's not only like living in a gift economy, in a gift culture that makes you feel at home. It's living in a gift universe. And that unending gratitude. Wow, life is a gift. Every experience that has happened to me is a gift. Everything I need is being born within me. I don't have to control things anymore. And I'm not saying there's never a time to make efforts. But we tend to think that everything is the result of efforts. And a lot of things are not. Most things are given to us. So yeah.
And yet you still speak them into being in a way.
Yeah.
Even through that gratitude is a way of speaking into being, invoking. It's still an invocation in a way.
Right.
Do you feel, though, that is, for me at least, that's what really fully installs that, is it must be spoken some way into being. So I wonder if there's a way that, how do we speak into being a new belonging?
Yeah, so that's another paradox, speaking something into being. You can't speak something into being that doesn't already exist. Or you could say that doesn't already want to happen. So the word, this is called prophetic speech. When you speak something into existence. You cannot do that to speak, the big rock candy mountain with lollipop trees and whiskey water fountains into existence. Because it's not actually there. It's not there in potential. It's not something that is ready to be born. And all it needs is our participation in it. All it needs is us to acknowledge it and to say yes. So the generative power of word is the power of yes. We have choice in this matter. Like, we can repudiate the gifts that we are given. We can say no, or we can say yes. And maybe some of them we should say no to. But that is really the primal choice that we have as human beings. And maybe the only choice. Yes or no. Attend to this or attend to that. Anytime you pay attention to anything, you are saying no to everything else in that moment. Right now, I'm paying attention to you. And now I'm going to pay attention to Inca, my dog. And I'm no longer paying attention to you. Like, yes and no. So, prophetic speech, to invoke something like I just did, to say, a new belief system is already being installed in you. And it becomes true as I say it. Really what I'm doing is I'm making an offering of my yes and sharing it with you. And you can join me in that reality or not. And maybe not. I mean, maybe you don't actually want to take on a new belief system right now. Maybe you've only been telling yourself that you do. Maybe it's not time. Maybe you get to choose your own course.
Another part about choosing a belief system, I think, is it can't all be intellectual. It has to be rooted in the body and embodiment as well. So, how do you suggest practicing wholeness, belonging? How do you feel? What does it feel like to you?
Yeah. So a belief system is not just thoughts in your head. Beliefs are the intellectual level of a belief that you can articulate is just like the most superficial level of an entire state of being that does include the body. And that's one reason why it's so rarely effective to try to convince somebody of something that they don't believe or to try to change their beliefs. Because whatever opinions they have are related to an entire life experience. And unless that changes, then their beliefs are not going to change. So when we are offered a new belief, or when I say a new belief is being installed in you, when that is true, it's because you are going through a holistic transformation. Could be a big one, it could be a small one, but something in you is changing way beyond the opinions that you express or the mental discourse in your head. That changes too, and we call that a belief, but it is part of something much bigger. And that change is usually the result of changing external circumstances, because who you have been is no longer relevant as the world changes. It maybe takes a while for you to evolve into coherence with the world's evolution. And maybe you choose not to do that, and you eventually choose not to stay in this world. Or, I mean, this is one of the psychic origins of dementia, Alzheimer's disease. Like, you're like, no, I'm not going to live in reality. I'm going to live in my past. Not that this is a conscious decision, but maybe you have incarnated to be a certain person. And that is relevant for a certain time. And when that time is past, then who you have incarnated to be no longer is at home in the world. And maybe you leave like by dying, or maybe you leave in some other way, through dementia, or maybe through psychosis. And there's nothing like bad about that. It's not an inferior moral choice. But what I'm speaking to is the multi-dimensional aspect of what we call belief. And many of us now are facing rapidly changing times. Therefore, beliefs that had once been relevant and part of a state of being that was relevant and that made sense and helped you get by in the world, enabled you to cope, are no longer relevant. None of that is relevant anymore. And so a lot of people probably are going to leave the planet, and a lot of people are going to feel like they're going through a death process. And a lot of people are going to go through big changes. And maybe there's going to be some bubbles of reality where things don't change much at all. And the gated community in 10 years is the same as it is 5 years ago. That could happen too.
Do you think there's a way that we need to change the way we speak about these issues? Like, it's baked into the language, the separation or the lack of belonging?
Yeah. Yeah, the English language and every modern language has a lot of ways of speaking, a lot of vocabulary, even its structure reinforces the perceptions of separation. The subject-object construction, for example. The proliferation of nouns in modern languages. Ancient languages had a lot fewer nouns and used a lot more verb forms. So yeah, but I would also say that the words that we use are not as important as the spirit that animates the words. And the voice beneath the words carries a lot more information than the words themselves. Because the voice is an emanation of the whole being. It is my flesh that creates my voice. And when I speak to you, I'm not just conveying information that could be transcribed and reduced to bits and bytes. I'm also sharing my breath with you. I'm sharing my being with you. And if you listen carefully, and especially if you listen beyond the words, you'll hear the whole person. This extraordinary degree of intimacy is always available. To hear somebody speak and really tune into them, it's as intimate as gazing into their eyes. But we habitually don't listen that carefully. We keep walls between each other. So yeah.
Maybe jumping off from that, do you feel like belonging is a verb or a noun? Like, is it something to be practiced, or is it something to be found? How would I go about looking at life as a way to belong more to everything, to expand my sphere of belonging? Because I think it's similar to love in that way.
Yeah.
Or just not treat it like an end destination to be found. And
Yeah.
Okay, I'm good. It's a practice every day, in every moment, maybe. Does that resonate?
If you want to experience more belonging, how to do that? First step, know that your longing to belong is a sacred treasure. And cherish your longing. And celebrate it. Don't suppress it. Don't try to comfort it. When you nourish that longing with your attention and your acceptance, it will generate opportunities for you to connect intimately with others, with the world. And because you have held it as precious, you will recognize those opportunities and you will act on them. And by doing that, you will be an agent for others to manifest their own longing to belong, because they will come into connection with you. That's how to orient yourself toward each next step in returning.
Let me try something. I'm gonna like close my eyes, and I wonder if you could speak into being sort of, or speak from your body too, maybe it helps if you close your eyes, of that belonging that's always there. It's always been there, it always will be there. It is eternal. And how that's flowing through you right now, what that feels like. And then maybe you can help me to understand where that's located in my own body, or the viewer, maybe them as well.
Yeah, sometimes I am gifted with moments where I know that I do belong and always have belonged, and that I'm not really separated. I think everyone is gifted with a moment like that sometimes. And again, I would say, and it's really a feeling in my whole body. It's like this, it's a feeling of stillness and emptiness and fullness at the same time. I don't find that I can make it happen, but I'm able to return to it. And it's important to return to it. Otherwise, I forget that it's real. I forget that it exists. There's some situations where it's rarely or never accessible, like a dinner party or a cocktail hour or somewhere with very loud music or loud machines. Yeah, it's important for me sometimes to put myself in environments where it's more accessible. You know, I don't particularly enjoy, even though I wrote a book called The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, it doesn't really describe that world so much. Here's how, you know, the economy works, here's the bike paths, and here's the gardens, and here's, you know, sometimes I take little bits of it. Like I know that it's more like I recognize that future when I see glimpses of it in the present. Like when I'm somewhere where the loudest sound I can hear is children playing, I'm like, yeah, that's it. Or when I venture into some place that's still relatively pristine and I can just hear how many birds, like the almost deafening chorus of birdsong or frog song, then I'm like, yeah, that's part of it. I don't think that we have to have a complete picture of it. All we have to do is recognize it. And I think everybody is gifted experiences that are outreaches of that future into the present, that reassure us that it does exist, that it is possible, and that we have a role to play in serving it, because it speaks to the part of us that resonates with that. And as that part of us comes more alive, then we go through transformation and our beliefs change because we saw it. And you can't deny, well, you can deny it, but no matter how much you deny it, it's still there. Like, yeah, I experienced that. I saw that, and I understood at that moment that this wasn't an aberration, but that it is a foreshadowing of what's possible. A promise. It's a promise. If you are sane, you will not reject that experience. You will not put it in the category of that doesn't count, that wasn't real. Really, I'm just asking people to trust themselves. What you experienced as real with your senses is real. The despair doesn't take those experiences into account. And so you're not playing with a full deck. If you do not include in your prognostication of the future the most connected, miraculous, healing, transformative experiences that you have ever had, then you are not operating with a full data set. You have to bring all of those in too, the best and the worst.
Deep, deep gratitude to Charles for sharing his time, his unique mind, and his big heart. You can find all of his work online at charleseisenstein.com. If you enjoyed this conversation, do let me know. These films and podcasts are entirely self-funded, and I have no plans to monetize or put anything behind a paywall. This is kind of all just shared in the spirit of the gift. So if you enjoyed it, I hope you pass it along in the same spirit.